Hello there, everyone. Art Burns here, wishing you well today. I really am wishing you well. I hope that today is finding you free from all kinds of suffering, free from pain, free from fear and insecurity, and that you're finding a way to forgive yourself and to forgive all those in your life because you know that forgiveness is where your relief lies. And I hope that you're finding yourself in a state of well-being, a state of happiness, and a state of really being connected to the love that exists for you and for everyone else in your life. I really hope that for you, right? And I also hope that over the course of all these videos that I've made, that I'm convincing you to believe in compassion, right? I hope that's true, because it's so abundantly clear these days with the research that's out there that shows that how important or how impactful compassion is on our mental, our physical, and our emotional well-being, right? It's so evident now with the research. And in fact, I was just watching and that includes compassion for everyone as well as compassion for ourselves, right? For which there's not really that much difference, as I said yesterday in the video that I made. There's not much difference between compassion for others and compassion for ourselves. It's kind of like a very fluid and connected thing. You kind of can't draw a line there, which I illustrated in my video yesterday. So check it out if you haven't watched it yet. But I was just watching last night, actually, a video of one of my favorite researchers. Her name is Dr. Kristen Neff, and she's really her specialty, and she's made her entire life. Her life's work is about self-compassion, and so she said something really profound yesterday. I believe the video was from 2019 or 2018, a speech that she was given, just a film of a speech that she gave, and what she said that was really staggering was, and now this is a woman again. She's a researcher, right? She's a PhD, doctorate, just absolute, the upper level of scientist and researcher, right? And she said that the information, the papers, and the research coming out in publication so fast that she can't even keep on top of it, right? So I mean, and that's what she does, so it's like that, it to me says so much. Like that speaks volumes about how much science is going on about this stuff right now, and it's true. There's just so much evidence that out there right now that shows the importance, the value of compassion, and especially self-compassion, right? Self-compassion is and that's what Dr. Neff was talking about specifically with self-compassion, and how important it is, or how impactful it is, again, to our emotional resilience, to our sense of fulfillment, to our ability to love one another. Basically just our ability to get through this thing we call life, in a way that is healthy, happy, and fulfilled. And this is just, self-compassion and compassion at large are shown now with all this research to be at the very heart and the very core of all of this, right? All of our happiness and all of our fulfillment and all of our success, can be really, really impacted by the degree to which we are willing to practice compassion. And I know this from my own life, as someone who is not naturally compassionate. I did not grow up in an environment. I grew up in New York City. It's not a place that's necessarily known for compassion. It's very much known for, like, I got mine, you got yours. Yes, there's a lot of camaraderie in New York City, and New York City definitely gets a bad rap for being like mean. It's people are much nicer in New York than they're given credit, but and there is some compassion. But what I mean is, like, I learned when I was 7 years old by getting mugged. I learned about the propensity for humans to do harm to one another. And so this is something that's, again, compassion is not something that came naturally, and certainly self-compassion, right? Like, I grew up in a family that was very, very self-deprecating and very, very punishing of ourselves, and that became like sort of a badge of honor, is how hard you can be and how hard you can push yourself, so all of this took a lot of undoing for me, but that's my point here, right? it was so easy. It was the easiest thing I've probably ever done in my life, was to develop compassion. And the beautiful thing about that is, not only was it very easy, but I was just talking about this a little while ago, that, imagine I told you that, like, going to the gym, right, would not only get you in great physical shape, but it would also feel better than anything else you do in your life, right? That's what compassion exercises are, right? There's something that are so impactful, just the ability to transform this sense that you have to the rest of the world and to yourself with compassion is profoundly powerful, but it's also so enjoyable to do the work, right? It's like, so it's win-win all around, right? And so one of the key aspects of compassion, right? Whether it's compassion for ourselves or compassion for others, which, by the way, as I said in the video yesterday, if you haven't watched it again, go check it out. There's little difference between, in fact, there's really no difference between self-compassion and compassion for others, right? It's a fluid, kind of cyclical thing that feeds itself, right? It's not like you can, like, draw a line and say, okay, I'll be compassionate for myself but not for others, or I'll be compassionate for others and not for myself. Of course you can do this, right? And a lot of people, that's sort of the last domino to fall, is when we start feeling that compassion towards ourselves, but it is not as an intention. There's no difference, right? And so that's an important thing to understand, is you're learning how to practice compassion, which, again, I would love to help you figure this out. And if I haven't convinced you of any of this, please get in touch with me. Please, please, please. I would love to have more conversation, because this is really, really powerful and very helpful. So, a really kind of curious thing about compassion exercises, though, and compassion practices, is how there's a cyclical thing to it, right? As I've mentioned this a lot, right? That, what we call a virtuous cycle, right? As opposed to a vicious cycle, right? A vicious cycle is when bad stuff just keeps coming back, and, you feed the bad with your reaction and that kind of stuff. The same thing happens on a virtual, like a positive, virtuous, a positive sense, and that's something that happens with compassion. Let me explain to you what I mean. So there's a lot of things that you'll come across as you're doing compassion exercises, that you realize that that when you're doing it, like, you have to have a certain concept in your mind, right? So let me just talk about what the point that I'm trying to drive towards is connection, right? It's very, very important to have a sense of connection as you're developing compassion, right? Like, understanding the connection that we have to each other is going to fuel your compassion, right? But at the same time, as you practice and you develop the skill of compassion, you realize how much that connection is really true. And by the way, folks, I've talked about this a lot, right? We're not talking about a spiritual only concept of connection, right? There is hard-nosed neuroscience right now, that is telling us, or has been telling us for the last 20 or 30 years, more and more, that, and again, more and more research is coming out all the time that shows that what contemplative practices like Buddhism have been talking about for 2,500 years, right? That this connection that we do have, this interbeing that we do have with one another, it's real. It is very, very real, and it's measurable. In scientific terms, it is a real and measurable thing. And again, if you're interested, I can give you, half of these books are going to mention that on some level, and I would gladly read you from these books to tell you how these scientists are working on this stuff, right? And so this is one of those things that as we're developing compassion, understanding that connection is very important. But then as you develop compassion, you understand that connection even more, and that just becomes this, like, snowball, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And again, stress reduction, emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, fulfillment, sense of purpose, all of these things are just abundant when you're practicing compassion, when you allow your heart to lead you with compassion, And so one of the key aspects to this connection that I just talked about, right, which again is very much at the core of what compassion is all about, right? Understanding this connection that we have to one another, right? At the, a very important aspect of this is to kind of just recognize that in that connection that we have to each other, right? Just in the connection that makes us all human, right? Understanding that there are certain things that we know about every human being just because they're human, right? And those things are that we experience fear. We all do. We all experience some level of suffering. We all have to deal with hard times. Life is not perfect for anyone, you know? And so as we're going through life in general, especially as we're working on compassion in our lives, you know, understanding this connectivity that we have to each other in this particular sort of human experience that is not perfect, that is filled with challenges, that is filled with pain and suffering that we all experience. You know, this is a very, very important part of life in general, as I say, not just practicing compassion, but certainly it is vital to understand this as we're practicing compassion. So Jack Kornfield in this book right here, I always know where this book is. This is one of the most important books I've ever read. The Wise Heart by Jack Kornfield. Okay, now it's very much about Buddhism and Buddhist psychology. Actually, Jack Kornfield is a person who was at one point a monk in Thailand, and then after being a monk, he came to America and became a PhD psychologist. And now he's kind of both. He runs a meditation center outside San Francisco. And he also, sees clinical patients. I believe he still does. But anyway, this wonderful book. I mean, don't walk, run to your bookstore to get this book. But in here, he tells this really wonderful story. It's actually the very first words in the whole book are this story about inner nobility. Right, and apparently this is the first concept of Buddhist psychology. Right, is to recognize the inner nobility that each of us has within us. Right, in ourselves and in others. Right, and again, this is like kind of what I'm talking about with the connection. Right, to understand that we all have certain innate kindness and certain innate, just nobility, as they talk about, which is a beautiful way to look at it. They talk about in Buddhism right now. Now, full disclosure, I am not a Buddhist practitioner, nor am I a Buddhist teacher. I approach mindfulness from a very scientific level, very evidence based. All these books. 10% are from Buddhist, people, but 90% are from scientists, and that's how I've learned this, right? But the facts, cannot be denied that mindfulness was originated by the Buddha himself, like that's the original mindfulness practitioner, right? And so there is certainly a lot of overlap that comes. So anyway, I want to share this story that Jack talks about in this book. Okay, what he talks about is an enormous statue outside the capital city of Thailand called Sukhothai. I believe that's how you pronounce it. There's a temple, a Buddhist temple with what was with this huge statue of the Buddha that was made of just clay and earth and wasn't really very beautiful. Was never known for its beauty, but it had been there for like 5,000 years, right? And so, and in that time, 500 years probably, pardon me, but in that time, in that region of the world, that kind of time that passes, you're talking about changes of government, you're talking about extreme weather, you're talking about just, lots of conditions that happen. And the fact that this statue had stood for this many hundreds of years, I have to look that up if it's 5,000 or 500. Pardon me. 500 years. Sorry. So it was revered not for its beauty, this statue, but for its sheer longevity, right? And it's impressive, in that part of the world, you have changes in government and they tend to just, destroy artifacts of the people whom they're conquering, So the fact that this statue had stood, even though it wasn't the most beautiful, the fact that it had stood so long was very, very impressive. And so at one point, point, after, it was made of clay and earth and, mud and stuff. So it was clear to the monks who lived in the monastery, in the temple in which this Buddha stood, that it was going to need repair and painting at some point, right? And after a spell of particularly dry weather, the cracks that were forming in the clay of this statue had become wide enough that one monk one day came and shone a flashlight into one of these cracks, to just curious to see what was in there. And what shone back was brilliant gold, right? And so they realized that this statue was made of solid gold, right? So of course they cleaned up all the mud and the clay off of it, and they realized that this was the biggest gold statue of the Buddha that had ever been created. And now, now people flock to it to see this amazing statue, And so the reason that Jack tells us this story is because, he draws the parallel between, how we do the same thing. Like, each of us has this inner nobility, right? But we cover it up, right? We cover ourselves up with mud and with dirt to try to protect ourselves, right? Because that inner nobility feels, it feels vulnerable, and that's why they believe that the monks covered this gold statue with mud, is because they wanted to protect it, right, from invading armies or thieves or what have you, right? They wanted to protect it, so they covered it, right? And we do the same thing with ourselves, right? We cover ourselves to protect ourselves, right? But here's a profound thing that Jack says in this wonderful story, is that when we do this, right, we often have a tendency, just like the monks over 500 years had forgotten that there was gold inside that statue, right? We tend to forget that we have this inner nobility that we've covered up through the experiences of our lives, that we've covered and kind of forgotten about, and that we're acting from the place of this protective layer, right? And that's the thing that, when we can remember, right, and when we can recognize that each one of us, right, including ourselves and everyone else around us, even people who have done horrible things, right, inside of them there is a nobility that has been covered up maybe for their entire lives, right? Maybe is covered so thick that they'll never be able to find that nobility up for themselves again, right? But as you kind of contemplate, as you look at people and you can see that every single person you interact with has that inner nobility, just like you do, right? That is a way that you can build that connection, right? And just doing that, just building that sort of, mental, emotional connection through that understanding, that's going to be a huge first step towards practicing compassion for yourself and reaping all the many benefits that I talk about in these videos from compassion, right? And so yeah, I really recommend that you kind of contemplate that a little bit, and just and that's what the compassion practices are all about, and that's why it feels so good, right? Because what you're doing is you're kind of recognizing that we all have these things going on, right? Like I said, we're all going through suffering. We're all going through difficulties at different times in our lives. And we're also having wonderful successes. All of us, are having good times and bad times. And that's what life is, right? Like John Kabat-Zinn says, the full catastrophe is our life, right? It's a combination of all of this, this beauty and wonder, and also this real difficulty and pain and suffering, and when we can recognize that we're all going through this, but that we all start from a place, and this is also something that's hard-nosed science has shown us, that we come into this world with an innate sense of goodness and kindness, right? They've done ad nauseum, experiments with babies showing this, right? That consistently, absolutely consistently, babies are always drawn to kindness, and babies always are, expressing kindness until they learn otherwise, until they start covering that up with a protective layer, right? That's taught to us by our parents, our teachers, our, the people who mug us and steal our bicycle when we're 7 years old, that kind of stuff, covers us up. And so when we realize that inside of us there is this golden, nobility, that's the first step. And the steps just get easier and easier and easier. So if you'd like to learn about some of these really simple compassion exercises, I implore you to get in touch with me, okay? Because you'll be amazed at how easy these are, and you'll be amazed at how quickly the results are going to come to you. And I'm talking about results again: body, mind, and spirit. Like, physically, mentally, and emotionally, right? That everything is going to change just through the practice of spirit, of compassion, and of course with mindfulness, with a mindful approach to it. Okay, and I can help you, so let me help you. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening, and I wish you well. I'll be back again tomorrow with a really special episode that actually came from a viewer, a listener, a person on YouTube actually wrote me with a suggestion to talk about how mindfulness relates to addiction and addiction issues, and I'm going to do a video on that tomorrow, and I'm really excited. Thanks for watching, everybody. Wish you well. Take care.